we continued swimming through the night. We swam through this field of dreams, trying to think about what it would be to reach the Palos Verdes shore. The water was so black that it was hard to see anyone around us. And as we were stroking, there would be these pearls of water rolling off our fingertips, and we could see the effervescentness of the water. It was beautiful, but it was also terrifying because as we swam, we could feel these huge bodies moving underneath us. And at one point, we would like bump into each other and scare the heck out of our friends as we're swimming along. Our goal was to be the youngest group of kids who swam across the Catalina Channel. Andy was 14, and the rest of us were as well. We had been training for about a year off the coast of California, and we were so excited because there'd never been a group this young of kids swimming across Catalina. We got about halfway across, and one of our team went into hypothermia, and she had to be pulled out of the water. But we kept swimming for the next total of 12 and a half hours. When we reached shore, we began to think about climbing up the cliffs of Palos Verdes that we would get to the top of and then reach our cars and go home. As we were driving back to our homes, I was thinking, this was one of the most exciting things I've ever done in my life. Because as you're swimming across the Catalina Channel through that blackness, it's like a sea of dreams. And as the water's flowing around you, your mind's flowing, and you're thinking about what you're doing in the water, you're thinking about your friends beside you, you think about a lot of the time, when are you going to finish? And then when you finally finish the swim, it's done. And so my idea right after that was I wanted to swim across the English Channel. So I went to talk to my parents the following morning and said, Mom and Dad, would you help me train for the English Channel? And they said, sure. So I went to my coach, who was an Olympic coach, Don Gambrell, and I said, Don, my goal now is to swim across the English Channel, but I would really like to swim across the channel and break the world record for men and women. And he looked at me and said, I've never coached anyone to do the English Channel before. And I said, that doesn't matter. I've never done it before. So maybe if we work together, this will work out. So he said, okay, I'll train with you. Well, when I had been swimming in the swimming pool, I was swimming with the best swimmers in the world. They had come from Sweden and New Zealand and Africa, and so I had seen what it was like to be around the best and what it took to be the best. And so what Gambrell did for me was to tailor my workouts to the ocean, and I would swim between 5 and 10 miles offshore in the morning or in the evening, depending on the day. And my mom or dad would walk along the beach with me. And what I would do is as I swam, I would stay along with them and keep at their pace. So no matter how strong or weak the current was, I would swim with them, and I would be able to feel the water and be able to know what I had to do to adjust my speed to the current change to be able to maintain the constant pace when I did a long swim. I trained for a year for the swim, went to England, and found a pilot. When you swim the English Channel, you have to get a pilot who's part of the Channel Swimming Association, who is a fisherman pretty much by trade, and his father and the father before were all fishermen. So they know the currents extremely well between England and France. I was the luckiest person in the world because I was able to find Reg Brickell, and he had taken the most record-breaker swimmers across the English Channel. And so I talked to him, and he said, what's your goal? And I told him, and he sort of looked at me like, are you serious? But then he said, well, what was your time for the Catalina Channel? And I said, well, I swam with a group of kids, and it took us 12 hours and 36 minutes. And so he said, well, what is your pace? What do you plan on doing? And I said, well, I swim about 2.5 knots. And so he said, I really think this might be possible. So to have like the best guy in the world to take you across the English Channel and to train with a coach that was one of the best coaches in the world, and then to go to England and get a chance to go. When you go to swim the English Channel, you have to wait for the tides and the weather to coincide. So you do not swim on a full moon because you have a full tide and you have a lot of water movement. Swim on a half moon or a half tide, a neap tide. And you start from England and you swim toward France. And when you're doing the swim, you usually start at midnight, again in that blackness of night. You have an official on board the boat who watches you as you're swimming and records your stroke rate, records when you feed, records everything that's going on, the wind speed, the currents, and they monitor your progress. Well, back then when I swam the English Channel, there was only radar. There was no GPS. And so in a straight line, when you're swimming from England to France, you do this great big inverted S. And the stronger the current, the bigger the S. So we set off from England at midnight. And it was so exciting because to be 15 years old and to have this huge dream and to then set off and know that you're swimming to France and you've never been to France before, so you're wondering, what will it be like to reach France? Will you actually hear people speaking French? I had learned how to speak French in school, so I had been practicing. Tu nages la Manche. I swam the channel. I swam the channel. And when you do these swims, you're focused on your movement through the water. You're pulling, reaching, you're stretching. One arm reaches for the future, the other one releases the past. You go through currents, you go through changing tides, you go through wind shifts, and you keep going, and you get really tired, you get really cold, you get really sore. And if you get hungry, they will throw you from the boat, either oatmeal raisin cookies, because I like those, and you would swim over as fast as you could before they sank. And then you would eat the cookie very quickly because you don't want to get cold, and you start swimming again. And as you go further, the cold starts to permeate your skin, and you feel it moving deeper into your body, so you try to swim faster. But there are periods along the way where you need to hydrate, and so my drink of choice was warm apple juice. And back then, we didn't have water bottles. So my mom figured out, let's empty out shampoo bottles and use those as the water bottles. And so every hour or so I'd stop and feed. I was about 4 hours ahead of the men's world record and about a mile offshore. And the tide changed. And the difficulty with swimming in this channel is that when you are coming into France here, it's a peninsula, and when the tide's moving out, you start fighting against this current. And a lot of times, swimmers will get within this mile of shore and not be able to get in. Well, it's also like running a marathon run and watching the finish line slowly slide backwards. And so at that point, after you've been swimming 6 or 7 or 8 hours, you're sprinting, and you're trying to beat the tide. I was so lucky because Reg Brickle kept altering the course of the boat, and I kept going with him. And I realized that, it's a lot like life. As you get stuff thrown at you, it's a lot like business. As you get things that change and shift, you have to have a crew around you that's able to help you shift, but you're the one and ultimately that has to make it. So my mom's on board the boat yelling for me to go faster, and the observer, Mickey's like, go, love, go! And I'm like, oh, man. So finally, break through the current and reach this area where there's a choice of landing on the rocks or landing on the soft beach. But the soft beach is about a half mile further. And so it's like, okay, there's waves breaking against the rocks. You could get hurt. There's sand. Okay, do you want to break the record? Yes, I do. So swim and get smashed against the rocks, climb out, and see in the distance these white cliffs, and you see 3 people standing up there, and they yell, Tu nages la Manche? And I thought, I had been practicing all night long. Oui, je nage la Manche. And they were like 3 people clapping, and I knew I had made it to France. It was like, yay! So then you're on these rocks, and you have to climb down and dive into the water, and then swim out to the little dory where they're going to try to get you into the dory to get you on the boat. And back then, I was told that you're supposed to use lanolin because it helps you stay warm, and it prevents your swimsuit from chafing. So now at the end of the swim, you're going over to the dory, and they're trying to hoist you into the dory, but you're covered with this grease. So you sort of get halfway up, and they drop you down, and then they and then they decide, okay, we'll just treat her like a bunch of dead fish. And so they scoop me up, lift me over, and throw me in the dory. And I'm lying on the floor of the dory, and I'm very cold. And I'm rowed over to the major boat where we're going to find out what happened, and the observer's crying. And I'm like, Mickey, what's wrong? And he can't talk. And I'm like, Mickey, did I do okay? He goes, you broke the women's world record by an hour and the men's record by 20 minutes. And so I was like, yay, yay, thank you. Yeah. So thank you very much. It was really exciting to do that and to have that support. And then I went back home and went back to high school to figure out what to do next. Kind of a little bit of a letdown, but I was really lucky because there was a man named Davis Hart who was from Springfield, Mass., who swam the English Channel and broke my time So I decided I wanted to go back again and break his time. So that was a great motivator, and I'm really glad because, we need people to inspire us one way or the other. And this was something that gave me a new focus, because when you swim the English Channel, it's like the highest goal, and what do you do after that? So I went back, and the first time I swam the English Channel, I swam 33 miles. Straight line is 21 miles. And if you look at the charts now for English Channel swimmers, they swim about 22 or 23 miles because of GPS and being able to get in on the tide before it changes because of a more direct route. So the second time I tried the English Channel, I wound up swimming 30 miles and broke his time by about 20 minutes. And then I realized that, like life, like business, like whatever we do, we can spend our entire life repeating what we've done before, or we can do something new. And I had met a woman from New Zealand who had said, there have been 3 men who have swum across Cook Straits, but there's not been any woman. Why don't you think about doing that? And so I looked at a map of the world, and I looked at New Zealand, and I saw there's a North and South Island, and I realized that in a straight line, it's 10 miles. So at my pace, after 5 hours, I should be able to reach the South Island. So that was in my head. Okay, so got local support from the Life Saving Association and John Cataldo, the local pilot, and Robbie, who was on a long paddleboard beside me. And we set off from the North Island heading south. And as you're swimming across Cook Straits, we had weather reports, but this was like in 1975, before we have the weather satellites that we do now. We did not know there were 2 storms going on, one from the north, from the Cook Islands heading south, and one from the south, from Antarctica heading north. And they were converging on Cook Strait. So the normal tidal pattern was completely gone. And after 5 hours of swimming, instead of being halfway across or all the way across, we've been going backwards for 5 hours. So it was a little bit depressing. It was just like, oh man, are we ever going to make it? So the people on board the boat told me that Air New Zealand was altering their aircraft so they could watch our progress and give us feeds on what the weather was doing as I was swimming. And then people from all over the country started calling out and saying, Lynne, we believe you can make it, keep going. And you get a Girl Scout from Dunedin, a Boy Scout from Christchurch, you get a sheep farmer from the Northern Alps of New Zealand, you get people from all over the country calling out to the boat where there's a radio on board, and we would find out updates of people listening to the story as I was swimming. And then the captain of the Antarctica, Captain Brown, came alongside with his ferry and raised the American flag and had everyone on board come out and cheer me on. And the waves were between like 6 and 8 feet high, and I'm like just battering it, and I'm like, this is just not fun. But you see these people and you're like, I gotta keep going, I just gotta go. And so you're swimming and swimming and swimming, and then there's a point where I was just like, it was like 6 hours into the swim. I was so tired. I was getting depressed. I, been battling 45-knot winds, and it's hard to breathe. It's hard to see. And suddenly I looked down and I saw something very big moving underneath me. And I turned to Robbie on the paddleboard and I said, what's that? And he looked down and he couldn't see. There were white pointers between the North and South Island of New Zealand. They're sharks, and they're very aggressive. And so I'm like swimming a little closer to Robbie, and John Cataldo's pulling over in his skiff, and he's looking under the water, and he just starts cracking up, and he goes, this, like, well, yeah, what does that mean? And he's just like, wait a minute. And suddenly there are 2 dolphins that jump out of the water in front of me and then go down. And then a few minutes later, there are between 50 and 60 dolphins that are swimming all around us. And the water between the North and South Island of New Zealand is like sky blue and so transparent. So you can look down into the water and see layers and layers and layers and layers of dolphins. And they're black and white, so they've got these little tuxedos on, and they're looking at you as you're swimming. And then at some point, a couple of them jumped up and started spinning. And then the others would follow. And so for about an hour, these dolphins were just keeping company, keeping me going. And everyone, most of the people on board the boat were like seasick. So they're like, something different finally, So the dolphins swam on, kept swimming 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, 11 hours. The sun's starting to set behind the South Island. Captain Cataldo's like telling me, you gotta pick up your speed. I'm like, yeah, I'm tired. It's like, you gotta pick up your speed. Like, why? well, it's shark feeding time, and it's not, it's like, okay, I'll pick up my speed. I will go faster, no problem. So as we were coming in toward the South Island, the water bottom drops off, and you get this huge flow of cold water that pops up. And with it, you have lots of fish and lots of animals around, and that's why you're concerned about feeding time and finishing quickly. Dolphins moved in around us. They were between 6 and 8 dolphins that came right beside us. And what I had heard years ago was that dolphins will protect you from sharks. And so there were fishermen from the South Island who had come out to help. And they were saying, go this way. And the dolphins that were beside us were saying, go this way. And so it's like, go with the locals. So I followed the dolphins to shore. And then there were these long strands of bull kelp that were like this thick around. And so the current is changing. It's moving between 2 to 5 knots. And there's these whirlpools created small around. So I'm pulling myself, using the bull kelp to get to shore. We reached there 12 hours and 2.5 minutes. Really tired at the end of that swim and really, really satisfied, but got back on board the ship with my crew. We went back through Cook Straits. I did not know this, but our 2 major 40-foot boats almost sank on the way across. It was so rough. The next morning, I'm told to make sure that I'm outside at noon. Like, okay, so at noon I step outside, and I find out that church bells have been rung throughout the entire country to celebrate the finish of the swim. And what I realized then is that a swim can be so much more than a swim, that it is so much bigger than that. And so I went on from there to swim across the Bering Strait. And this was a big goal because I was trying to use the swim as a way to open the relations between the 2 countries. And so I swam from Little Diomede to Big Diomede and had a crew of Inuit who went along with me. The distance of the swim was 2.7 miles. The water temperature was 38 degrees. And I wanted to do it under my own power because I really felt that this was about reaching out to the Soviets to bridge the distance. And when I would swim from the present into the future. So we set off and went through the fog and finally reached shore. And what I want to do is show you the aftermath of the swim.
I'm a little bit cold right now, but very, very glad to be here.
Сколько времени находились в воде?
The way they received the swim in the Soviet Union was that I had sort of been elevated to cosmonaut status. They really got into it because the Russians know about endurance and they know about cold. And they really identified with what I'd been doing.
In her honor, the Soviet government named a spot of land on Siberia's Lake Baikal, Cape Lynne Cox. And at a summit in Washington, the Soviet premier praised Lynne as a shining example of how to bridge the gap between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Last summer, it took a daring American girl by the name of Lynne Cox a mere 2 hours to swim the distance separating our 2 countries. By her courage, she showed how close to each other our 2 peoples live.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. That's good. That's cool. Thank you. So, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so anyway, so that worked. It was a big idea. It came from the sea of change, from the ideas that you get from the ocean. While you're swimming, you're thinking about how can you open borders, how can you work with people, how can you do things that have never been done. And so after the swim in Antarctica, I wanted to continue this research that I'd done on hypothermia and to try to figure out how can we push further, how can we do things we've never done, how can we learn about cold exposure and rewarming, how can we learn how to work together more. And so what I decided to do is do a swim in Antarctica in 32-degree water, in a bathing suit, cap, and goggles. And the idea was to push beyond what we ever think we can do. And I trained for it for a year. And I looked at the penguins as examples of how they were able to condition to the cold. And I grew my hair really long. And I piled it up in my cap. And I didn't use anything other than the bathing suit, cap, and goggles. And I went forward to do the swim in Antarctica.
Hey, Barry, I'm going to Antarctica. You are, hon. You are.
She's probably got something like 30 seconds to go. She's done it.
Lynne has done even better than she hoped. Measured by a navigational satellite, she has covered 1.22 miles.
So the idea is that we can have big dreams, and it's the ocean that supports those dreams. It lets us flow through the water, and our minds flow, and it enables us to go beyond what we've ever imagined possible and bring that back and share with people so that they can go and expand on their seas of dreams and do things they've never imagined possible, but then they accomplish them. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.